Hey YouTube, how's it going? It's Quentin here and welcome to tutorial number 41. And in this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about styling forms. So yeah, if we take a look at this in our browser real quick, I just want to show you all the code I'm working with. If you take a look at this in the browser, we've got one submit button that is visible, and that's the only thing that's visible. I don't know, maybe I should zoom in a little bit so you can see that a little bit more clearly, right? Then if we take a look at the text editor, this is the code I'm using for this tutorial. Basically code that I borrowed from all the other tutorials. So if you've been following along with the tutorial, that's good. Right, so it's just a form and then an input of type submit. And in our CSS file, we have absolutely nothing, right? If you want to download this code, it is available for download on Patreon. You just got to pledge $1. You don't actually have to pay the dollar, just pledge $1 and you'll be able to download the code, and then you can unpledge later on. Although I would really like it if you did keep that pledge going, right? So now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's take a look at actually how to style this button. So the thing with input types is because input elements have this attribute called type, which changes how they look. You can't just select an input element in CSS the same way that we've selected other elements before, right? So if you want to style this input of type submit, you got to select it a little bit differently. You can't just type in input and think, okay, yeah, I'm going to select that input button, right? Because sometimes you have input type of text or input type of number, and all of those look a little bit different. So in this case, what we want to do is add in some square brackets. So these are not curly braces, these are square brackets. We'll add in the curly braces after that. And then inside of the square brackets, you want to go ahead and say type is equal to, add some quotation marks in there. And inside these quotation marks is where you put the type of the element that you want to select, which in this case, we want to select this input type of submit. So let's go ahead and grab that and place that in here, right? And now we should be styling submit buttons on our page. And the way to test that is to just go ahead and add a background and set that equal to not submit. I have fly cut over here, which keeps record of things that I've copied and pasted recently. Okay. So now we have input type of submit with a background color of, this should be red. And if we save this now and come back over to the browser and refresh, you can see I now have a red-ish kind of submit button. Problem is, if you take an even closer look, there is this gray border going around our button, and that doesn't look very good. So I kind of want to get rid of that, right? And the way we get rid of that is just by setting border to 0 pixels. So yeah, if you ever want a button that looks kind of flat, you're going to want to get rid of that border. And that should make our button look a little bit better. But there are still a few more things that we can do to actually make this button look much better. Right, so one of those things is to maybe just add a little bit of padding. And you want to add some padding to the top and the bottom, and then some padding to the left and the right, but you want more padding on the left and the right, usually, because you want the button to be more rectangular, right? So I'm going to add 5 pixels to the top and the bottom and 20 pixels to the left and to the right, and that should leave us with a nice big submit button. If I zoom out back to 100%, that's pretty much what it should look like in your browser. Another thing you might notice is black text on a dark red button is not very easy to see. So you might want to just change the color of the text with the color property to #FFF, and that'll make it white. So you have light text on a dark background, much more convenient, right? So let's come back here and refresh. And there we go. That's a lot more readable, right? So that is the submit button. And something, a quick little tip I want to give you guys is that if you ever have more than one button in your form, like you might have an input type of button or a button, just like the button tag, you might want to copy this code and apply it to more than one element at a time. And the way you do that is by just taking that selector, right? And after that, adding a comma and then adding your next selector. So this comma over here is very, very important. Don't forget about that. And then input type. Let's select input type of button, and then we can go ahead and also just select anything that has a button tag. And what that does is then just applies all the same styling to any one of those elements, right? So now I can take this input type of submit, copy and paste that, just add it or change the type to button, and we can just change the text to something else like button. And when you refresh that, you now have a button and a submit button. They look pretty much identical, and that's because we've given them the exact same styling over here. But input of type button is a little bit different to an input type of submit. An input type of submit will submit our form, whereas an input type of button, if you use JavaScript, you can make it do some cool stuff without actually submitting the form. So these things are used in two different places. For most of us, we'll probably only use the submit button. So yeah, let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves by asking questions about that next one. I just wanted to show you the styling. Okay, so now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's take a look at actually styling other input elements. So input of type text is the next kind of element that we're going to work with quite a lot. And I'm going to give that a name equal to name and an ID equal to name. And I should probably just put a label in front of here as well. So let's open up the label tag and say name. And the reason why I gave this an ID is because when you use the for attribute in a label, if you take the exact same thing that was in the ID and paste that in the for attribute for the label, yeah, when you click on the label, it selects the input, right? So click on the label and it's going to select the input. So something I'd really like to do right now is make our button and the input more or less the same height, or just style them a little bit better. So right now they're actually pretty close, but I think what happens if I change my button to be a little bit bigger? So let's make my button 10 pixels on the top and the bottom. Now you can see the button is quite a lot bigger than the text element. So we might want to change that and have them match a little bit. So you can select input of type is equal to text, and basically style that to have a padding of I don't know, a few pixels as well. This is something you're gonna have to play by eye, because they're not always they don't always appear to be exactly the same height. Like if you zoom into that a little bit, you can see the button is definitely bigger than the input, right? So sometimes what I like to do is just give that a height, and I set that equal to, well, I set that equal to whatever the button actually lands up being. So in this case, if I inspect element and I go to layout in my element inspector, the button is 10 pixels plus 10 pixels plus 13. So that should be 33. So that means I can give this text element over there a height of 33 by going back over to my input, my styling rule, and just saying height 33 pixels, right? So let's come back here and refresh, and not quite, right? And I think that's because the padding. So yeah, this is just something that you have to play around with. It sometimes is a little bit tricky, but that's why using something like Firebug in Firefox is quite handy, because it gives you these little rulers and that kind of stuff. So yeah, anyway. Okay, so anyway, I just went ahead and changed that value. I find that a height of 25, if I'm not going to add any padding or anything to this, kind of suits the element. So height of 25 works. I'm going to leave that as it is. But like I said, it's just something you might want to play around with a little bit by eye. And what we can do to maybe make this form look a little bit better is add in a few break tags. you know, if the form's going to get a little bit longer, can add in a few break tags or something just to put the button on a different line to our elements. And there's actually a lot more stuff that you can do with forms if you want to really control the layout. But this tutorial is going to get kind of long, so I'm going to move on to adding different widths and stuff like that in the next tutorial. So I just want to send a shout out to my sponsors at Dev Mountain. They run a coding bootcamp with courses on iOS development, UX design, and web development, and they'll teach you everything you need to know to get a job within this field, and they'll do it within 12 weeks. So check out their website, the link is in the description below, and if you do contact them, make sure to tell them that I sent you. Special thanks to the guys whose names are on screen now. These guys contribute $5 or more on Patreon, and I really appreciate that. While you're still here, there are a few other things that you can do to help out, so follow me on social media and check out some more of my content, and I'll see you guys next time.